to another tropical update from Cayman Hurricane Center. I'm Adam McDoom, and here we're talking about multiple systems. But just before that, the video that you just saw was some of the conditions of what we had here in Grand Cayman as the outer bands and the outer edges of the storm had Hurricane Irma had impacted Cayman as it was traversing across Cuba and then turning its way towards Florida. But here, we're right back into it again with multiple threats on the radar, and the threats will have impacts to the east coast of the United States and the Caribbean once again. So let's get right into it. First on your screen here is the satellite imagery of Tropical Storm Jose, or well, as now with reconnaissance aircraft flying into the system, finding this thing back up to hurricane intensity. Still waiting for the official advisory to come out to reinstate this as hurricane. But as of the most recent advisory that's out, came out a couple hours ago, Tropical Storm Jose at the time, 11 a.m., located 26.5, 69.4, moving northwest at 9, minimum pressure of 989 millibars, with a max sustained winds of 70. As stated with hurricane reconnaissance aircraft in there, it is indeed finding the system stronger back up to hurricane intensity. As you could see here on the southwest side of the image is the island chains of the Bahamas. Luckily, nothing too drastic happening there. Some outer bands of clouds and maybe a few wind or two gust, but other than that, nothing really impacting there. The main threat from Jose will be to the east coast of the United States. Here is the official forecast cone for the area. As you can see, this thing will re-intensify back up to a hurricane, and there is a fair chance that this thing could potentially re-intensify up to major hurricane status as well. Once again, so you guys along the East Coast, particularly from the Carolinas northwards, should pay close attention to. The cone has been sort of wobbling back and forth a little bit, but the main threat looks to be potentially New Jersey up to Rhode Island, Massachusetts area. So all these areas here, even as much as I think this is Delaware and parts of Virginia, would also be looking at impact. There are some forecast guidances out there that are suggesting a track that would take Jose more towards a landfall, say anywhere from northeastern New Jersey, Long Island, potentially New York, Connecticut. So it's quite possible that we may be talking about this being a landfalling system. It is expected to gain in size, and with its intensity too, may potentially be a dangerous situation. However, there's also a chance that this thing could end up staying further to the east, weakening, and end up missing any landfall, but still the impacts would be greatly felt along the area because it is indeed expected to grow in size. So this is the official cone as of, again, the 11 a.m. advisory. We will see another update coming out soon with that. So there is that. We may be seeing tropical storm or hurricane watches and warnings issued for maybe the Outer Banks and maybe some of these areas up here as we go forward in time, maybe late weekend going into early next week. Now, another main area of development that will be a major threat would be Invest Area 96L. Now this thing is really ramping up, especially today. It's really gained itself a fair bit of convective activity. There is spin in the system. It is likely going to develop. This thing will likely become a hurricane as it heads towards Eastern Caribbean. Say what? Did I just say Eastern Caribbean? Yes, indeed. This thing is forecasted to make its way into the Eastern Caribbean. At the present time, they have a very high chance, a 70 to 90% chance of this thing developing. It will continue on that west to west northwest track, eventually passing somewhere within the northern Windward Islands or southern Leeward Islands. Luckily, looks like it probably won't be a direct hit on the northern Leeward Islands. They've already had enough with Jose and Irma. However, with this system, the impacts will still be felt across those areas. Beyond that, it's a bit iffy, but it's sort of a similar situation to with Irma. When Irma was in its general location, will it go north up the east coast, or will it go west towards the Gulf? And the way I see it, out of my opinion, would be that how the setup is, Jose pulls out quick. The ridge that is off to its west will eventually build back in and shove this thing off towards the west. So what will happen is that after the Eastern Caribbean, Central Caribbean islands will need to pay close attention to this, and eventually the Northwest Caribbean and the Southeastern United States will then need to watch very closely to this. Also, the other system that we are also watching is Tropical Depression number 14. That is expected to become Tropical Storm Lee later today. However, as you see here on satellite, not really doing as well as it was earlier. The convection is becoming more spread out, and it's not too great. But it is still expected to intensify, become Tropical Storm Lee, and it looks like that Lee would probably make its way out into the Atlantic and probably miss the islands. However, I will state this. There are some forecast guidance, there are some ensemble members that do agree that this thing will actually continue more westwards and impact the northern Leeward Islands. Again, it's way too early to say anything for sure on that bit, but we do know it should end up somewhere within this area here at that time. My apologies for that. Just to go back here to the Invest Area 96, and just to point out something, and I really hate saying this, a lot of these storms this year, the trend in the forecast has been south and west, and with that, it's concerning, because again, south and west with this system would throw this system further and further into the Caribbean. Let's just look at this here for a second. This is the European ensembles track genesis, and so it is fairly west to west northwest into the Caribbean, and then maybe interacting with here. But one thing I want to point out though is that look, this is a couple days ago. Hopefully that will load up for me here. This was the next image I'm about to show is a couple days ago, and couple days ago, the models were saying something quite a bit different. Matter of fact, the ensemble guidances had suggested a much more northerly track. Here we go, and taking it more up and out to sea. Now, a very stark difference from a couple of days ago to now, and that may continue. That may continue over time. We'll see this continue shifting south and west. The overall pattern this Atlantic hurricane season seems to be somewhat similar to 2004, 2008. to some extent 2010, where you kind of have this large Atlantic ridge and it's pushing everything down south and west into the Caribbean, into the Bahamas, into the Gulf, and this will have to be watched very closely. What I will mention is that for the Eastern Caribbean, as mentioned by the National Hurricane Center, that tropical storm watches or warnings and hurricane watches and warnings may be issued to the Eastern Caribbean islands as early as maybe even late tonight, early tomorrow, depending on how quickly this thing does ramp up. But either way, we're expecting by about day 4, day 5, this thing to be impacting the Eastern Caribbean. This is a terrible situation considering that the islands are still recovering from Jose, Irma, and even a few of the other storms that went through there earlier this year. The massive military effort at the moment to help these islands recover, and they're going to end up needing to get out the way for this system and then come back and pick up the pieces after that again. This situation is not looking good for the Eastern Caribbean. But you guys in the Eastern Caribbean, prepare yourselves again for another storm, potentially another hurricane heading your way. Luckily, by the looks of it, the northeastern Caribbean islands that have been severely impacted by Irma will probably not be feeling the heaviest of effects. It's still a bit early to say exactly, but by early estimates, it looks like the system will pass south of there, the southern Leeward Islands and the northern Windward Islands. These are the islands that we're expecting to see the impacts from this system. Just to give you an idea on some of those islands we are talking about, we're talking about St. Lucia, Martinique, Dominica, Guadeloupe, possibly as far north as Antigua. But again, the islands like Antigua, St. Bart's, St. Martin, Anguilla, the British Virgin Islands, those islands probably won't be seeing as large of an effect as, say, Irma, but still effects nevertheless are expected in those areas. So that is it. A pretty quick update for the time being. Again, there's a lot going on here in the background and a lot of busy times ahead for all of us here in the Caribbean, as well as for the United States, still recovering from Harvey and Irma, and soon we'll be having Jose to deal with. And so, busy times ahead, people. And also looking long-range light. There are also some suggestions of more stuff to come off of Africa and even some development starting up in the Western Caribbean, which is a little bit odd. Usually Western Caribbean development that throws northward usually doesn't happen until about October or November, but this year medium to long range guidance indicate that we could be looking at that. And then looking at the overall pattern for October and going into November seems to be very active for the Caribbean during those times there. Also, just quickly wanted to point out, as mentioned in updates, earlier updates, and I've been mentioning on social media and so on that one of my forecasts for the hurricane season was that we were to possibly get into a La Nina for this year. We're in cold neutral, and now officially we're under a La Nina watch, and we're likely going to be seeing ourselves get into a La Nina as we go through the rest of the year and going into winter. This will aid the development of tropical systems in the Atlantic for the rest of the season. This will also change up the patterns for winter, and some very interesting stuff to come over the coming months. I will be doing another update, much more detailed updates on these tropical system, and in particular with the La Nina, the impending La Nina development that is currently occurring. I'll be back with another update maybe tomorrow, hopefully. And yeah, so again, You guys in the Northeast U.S., watch very closely. You guys in the coastal areas, start preparing yourselves for Jose. For you guys in the Eastern Caribbean, start prepping yourselves now. I know that it's going to be very hard to do it because of the effects that you guys have had already. Start preparing now because it's going to take a long time for you guys to prepare, and it's going to be long lines. It's going to be everything. So just start preparing now for it, guys. Anyway, that's it from me, Cayman Hurricane Center, Adam McDoom, signing off for now. I'll be back a little bit later.